Brian, you love fun facts, don't you?
I'm all about fun. I'm all about facts and fun facts.
Okay, well, this fun fact is about me. I know 25 letters of the alphabet. I don't know why.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very good. I'm not even going to go into a whole explanation as to why that's very good. That was very good. Great way to start the episode.
Awesome. For you guys who've been here, I forget what episode it was. It was one of the recent ones that we made, where you had made an alphabet joke as well.
Yes, about a certain regarding a certain political figure who was very popular in history.
We both made some controversial jokes on that one, so we'll see how the audience responds.
Yeah,
you could say that our behavior might have been a little weird in that episode, huh?
Wow. God, Zach. Unbelievable. Okay, so any chance that there was a segue there into our episode? As a matter of fact, there was. So welcome, everyone, to the Value Added Podcast. Brian and Zach are here, and for one of the early editions of a video episode that we have, so you guys actually get to see our insert word here faces. I'll let you guys insert whatever word you want to decide. Like whatever word you decide to put there, we're gonna go with. But it's the same content as before. Just now you can see us instead of just hearing us. Now you guys get to see the faces that go with our insert word here voices. Same thing. Put whatever word you want for that. So Brian is here. Zach is here. We're both saying hello.
Hello. My name is Zach. Welcome, guys.
Yes, and that makes me Brian by process of elimination.
Correct.
Yes. So today we are discussing. Let's just go be blunt with it. We're discussing weirdness. Mm-hmm. That sounds like a pun intended weird topic choice, and also it might seem like one that you wonder if we're going to be able to cover it in a whole hour. But never underestimate the ability of Zach and I to take something and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, even if you think it's impossible, and get an hour out of it. And then, even after the hour, still think that there's stuff uncovered. That's probably going to be the case here. We're going to see how it goes. But today, we are discussing weirdness. That is the broad topic. We have several different specific questions that we're going to get into and then see where that goes. But that's the overall episode for today. I am Brian. Zach is here. Welcome to the Value Added Podcast, everyone. And Zach, take it away.
Okay, excellent. I did want to say that our next episode is going to be peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which we're going to also talk about for an hour. Don't ask how. We're just going to make it work. And then we're going to talk about pens, our favorite type of pens, and what makes pens so great. And then we're going to talk about our process of doing laundry. So those are our next few episodes. Yes, absolutely. So you guys need to strap in and get ready for those. Actually, none of those are going to happen, but today's episode is going to happen. We're talking about weirdness. And what is weird is going to be the first thing we want to cover today. So everyone knows the word weird. You know, what is it that pops into your mind when you think of something that's weird? The way I would define it personally, and I'll obviously pass it back to you, Brian, to see what your thoughts are on it. Abnormal is something that is abnormal outside of the realm of what you would usually expect in a given situation. Okay? So, for example, I go through the drive-thru and they get my order correct. You know, that would be a weird thing. That would be odd. Because
oh my god, it's like you and your drive-through stuff. My god.
Yes, exactly. And here some other examples. I go to a shoe store and they're selling shirts. Okay, I'm not expecting shirts at a shoe store. And there's things that just seem out of the ordinary, and sometimes those things are mundane. They don't matter that much. Sometimes they matter a lot more, which we're going to get into some examples of. You know, there are some things that are weird that maybe we shouldn't be accepting as much. But I want to pass it back to you, Brian, because I want to get your thoughts on the definition there that I laid out. What do you think?
If I was doing the word association game where you had to come up with one word that you could think of when you think of the word that was given to you, and the word was weird, the word I would probably say is unusual. Mm-hmm. That does not really satisfy anything, because you can ask the same thing about weird as you ask about unusual, which is, what do you mean by weird, or what do you mean by unusual? Now, one thing that Zach already hinted at that we're going to get into the episode is that weird is one of those words that has a negative stigma. Back to one of our earlier episodes about negative stigmas. Mm-hmm. But one of the examples that Zach gave is how weird can be in a positive way. I went to the drive-thru and they got my order right. That's in his mind, I guess, a weird thing that happened, but the weirdness was a positive for Zach. Most of the time, weird is not used in that sense. Most of the time, weird is used in a negative light to describe the person, the event, the activity, the behavior in a negative way. That is mainly what we're going to focus on. The quote-unquote negative, which we're putting in quotes because that's part of what we're discussing today, is it really negative? How negative is it? So on and so forth. But yeah, my word association would be unusual, aka not usual, which is, I guess, is synonymous with what you say, which is abnormal, not normal.
Right. Well, speaking of unusual, I'll share something with you guys that I normally wouldn't. I had been called weird in the past. I know it's really hard to believe. I know, but it was true. It's true. And the reason was because there were certain social situations I was in where I would not talk. And this was back, and I remember especially it was when I was in 8th grade, nervous, whatever, in school. And so what was interesting about it is, in my mind, I had justified it very easily as, well, I'm not going to contribute something to the conversation if I don't feel like I have anything to contribute. I'm what you would call an introvert. I don't think that everyone's voice needs to be heard. I know that's controversial, whatever. So a lot of times I would just not talk. People would have conversations or I wouldn't chime in. And so therefore I was weird for doing so because that was abnormal. Other people found it very natural to add in their opinions and whatever else. I did not. So, the weird thing, and I think the weird thing about it, right, is that the word weird is different for each of us. What is normal to me, what is my normal behavior, what is expected out of myself is not what society will expect out of me. It's not what my peers may expect out of me. And I think that kind of peeling back the curtain and thinking about why that is, why is it that I might think of a behavior as normal and someone else might not think? I think that's an important part of this conversation that I think we should spend some time talking about. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that we're going to get into. That's not a specific talking point, I don't think, but it's probably something that we're going to get into as we get on. As a side note, please to the audience, do not make a drinking game out of every time we make a weird pun like Zach did unintentionally earlier, because you will be needed to go to a hospital by the time this episode's over. Mm-hmm. I guess since you're the one sharing, I'll also share something similar. But what I'm about to share is not going to be as hard to believe, which is I've also been called weird on many occasions. Anyone who knows me would not find that surprising. In fact, the people who know me and are hearing this have probably called me weird before. So they're raising their hand being like, yep, that was me too. Similar experiences as far as with social interactions, not talking, standing in the corner, looking very uncomfortable and awkward. And many times it's around people who, I would work with them as an example, and I was not weird or uncomfortable or awkward while I was working, and then suddenly I go into a social setting and everything changes. Sometimes I told people in advance I'd be that way. They didn't believe me, and then I was that way, that kind of thing. The place that Zach and I worked together, which is how we met. So if you guys don't like us being a union, blame this company for bringing us together. Before Zach worked there, because I was new, I didn't know a lot of people. I wasn't comfortable with the job, so I kind of just did my own thing. And one of the guys who worked there asked me straight up, "Are you autistic? You never talk." Mm. And as a result of that, because I'm me, I made sure whenever he was around, I never said a word going forward, just to double down on that. But it was an indication of he thought that I was weird. He had a specific reason for thinking I was weird. Now, I guess to his credit, I guess you can say this to his credit, he confronted it and addressed it directly, but he didn't really address it in where he wanted an answer. It was his way, kind of like when people frame a question as a political statement, but it's not really a question. Same kind of thing. He wasn't really asking if I'm autistic and why don't I talk. It was his way of commenting, I notice you don't talk. I think it's weird. I need to remark that it's weird, but frame it in a way to make you sound nice. So that was why I decided to double down and just be extra non-talkative. But my point is, we both have experiences with being called weird, and so we have a little bit of not expertise, but a little bit of familiarity with the whole thing.
So a couple things. First, you are a much better man than I, because I would not have taken that even the slightest way as it being a coming across in a nice way. My cynical self, my cynical side says that was it's a jab. It's kind of like looking at someone saying, "Are you retarded?" when you mess something up or you don't do something right. They're not looking for insight, right? they're not looking for clarification on the reason. They're just trying to get a jab out there with whatever word they can use to try to put you down. So. I also think that it's interesting. Everyone listening to this has probably had at least one instance in their life where they've been called weird. And even if you have never been called weird, I guarantee you there's been at least one part in your life in which someone perceived you as weird, as doing something abnormal. So I want to talk about that for a minute. Weirdness in and of itself is just, like I said at the beginning, it's abnormal. It's unordinary. It's out of the norm, okay? And because we're humans and we're individuals, that's always going to happen. There's going to be a thing that I do that someone else doesn't. Even if I'm in a group setting with 100 people, we can still have 100 different outcomes or 100 different reactions to the same input. Somebody makes a joke. We're in a comedy show. And some people laugh, some people don't. Or no one laughs and I'm the only one laughing because maybe I'm the only one who gets it. That makes me weird because, again, I'm the outlier. But in any of these situations, whether we're talking about a comedy show or something else, people are going to behave differently, and that difference does not automatically mean a bad thing. So when we use a word like weird, you pointed this out, Brian, I think it's a good thing to point out, it has that negative connotation to it. People automatically think something's wrong because something's weird. And I don't want to take the opposite perspective on that because that's definitely not what I want to get across in this episode. But you have to have the understanding and the nuance that not everything that is abnormal is automatically bad. Some things are, and we're going to get to that later in the episode, definitely, but not everything is, okay? Like the person clapping and the other one everywhere else isn't. Take a funeral, for example. I think this might be a good example to illustrate the point. At a funeral, there's a very, very strong social, how do I put this, expectation to behave in a certain way, okay? When you're at a funeral, you're not expected to be at the funeral dressed in bright colors with a bright hat with feathers coming off of it. You're expected to be somber. You're expected to be mournful. But even that culturally changes depending on where you go. In other places, they celebrate the dead. They celebrate the dead in a variety of different ways, whether it's a send-off, like putting a body on a boat and having the boat go off and into the distance, or a celebration of death where there's music and dancing at a funeral. And that feels very weird and very odd to us because we're not accustomed to that. But even consider in the context of the U.S. and the Western culture where we have this mournful perspective of death, you could go to a funeral and you could see the wife of that person standing next to the casket and not crying. You might think to yourself, that's weird. But again, knowing that people act individually, knowing that people internalize things completely differently, helps us to understand that in those situations, although it might not be the normal reaction, there's nothing necessarily wrong with someone not crying at a funeral because, again, there could be many reasons why they're not. Maybe they had feelings towards that person that made them not like them or be happy. Or maybe they're joyful that the person's gone. Or maybe they dealt with those feelings in a different way. Especially if it's men, we're not allowed to cry at all. Just wanted to make that point clear, crystal clear, so everyone listening. No tears allowed. So that's an important point. But I've talked long enough here, Brian. Go ahead.
One of the things I like having the podcast set up where I get to respond to Zach because I don't have to actually do any foresight into what I'm gonna say. I don't have to prepare anything interesting. I can just respond to what Zach says. So Zach's basically the ringleader. He's tugging us along, and I'm just along for the ride. And I just say something based on what Zach says.
That means I have to say interesting things. So
yes.
That makes it difficult.
Not for me, though. My point is it's not for me. It's not difficult for me at all. As a side note, just because you mentioned funeral, this has nothing to do with the episode. It has nothing to do with funerals, but since you pointed it out, I might as well get my 2 cents in with this. It has baffled me for a long time, how people don't understand the idea that everybody grieves differently. It has baffled me for a long time. forget about some kind of personal situation where like a family member dies and then other people in the family are grieving differently. Forget about that. Even when like there's some kind of tragedy that's a big news event and everyone reacts to that differently, and the people who react one way look at the people who react a different way in some kind of negative judgmental fashion, and sometimes it's as simple as just people grieve differently at least in a way that is noticeable to an outside observer. It's something as simple as that. They're feeling every bit as bad about it as you are, or as you think that they should feel. They're just not expressing it the same way. It's baffling to me that people don't realize that, which leads to one of the points I was going to make from what you said. Because, let's be honest, weirdness, for a lot of times, is subjective, but it's being framed as if it's objective. This goes back to what I've said many times on many episodes. People cannot separate subjective from objective thought. So, in the case of like clapping at a comedy show, I didn't clap. Zach clapped. Forget about what everybody else did. I'm just talking about me versus Zach. I clapped. I didn't clap. Zach clapped. To me, Zach clapping is weird because I didn't clap, or I didn't cheer, or I didn't laugh. So just that alone is enough evidence for me to qualify Zach as weird or Zach's behavior as weird. But that is strictly subjective weirdness because it's all based on, it's different from my behavior, and my behavior is not weird because my behavior is the bar that all behavior is reached, that all behavior is measured by, is that. So anything that is different than my bar is automatically less than, aka weird. And people do this all the time without realizing it. That's just a one-on-one example. But
I think that's. Do you mind if I respond, or you had more? Do you want to say on that?
Have at
it. Okay. I think it's good that you're pointing out the subjective objective thing. And really, I want to kind of hone in on that a little bit more, because take, for example, the comedy show that you just said. In what you're talking about, it's just you versus me. You said you didn't clap. You said I did clap. But think about it this way. So for each of us, we have this, we're looking at the world through our own lens, through our own eyes. If you didn't clap, but I clapped, and everyone else in the area also clapped, now that kind of flips the script, because you're seeing, what you're doing is you're kind of making this hierarchy of mob rule, right? If everyone's reacting a certain way, or if the majority of people are reacting a certain way, that becomes the norm. That becomes what you in your mind think is the objective truth. But in lies the problem, is that that's actually not the objective truth. That is just whatever that's your subjective opinion of what you're currently seeing. And obviously an example of someone makes a joke, you're in a room with 100 people, 99 people clap, you don't. Okay? If that was the entirety of the world, then yes, you could say objectively that was a funny joke, that should have been applauded, should have been clapped, should have been laughed at. The problem is that there's a lot more people than just what you're seeing in your small little bubble. And not everyone would have that reaction. Now, if you expand that out, instead of 100 people, now it's 100,000 people, you're going to have a much different result. It's not going to be just one person saying they're not clapping. There's going to be a lot of people who are not clapping at this joke for whatever reason. Everyone has their own reasons for it. So coming to a conclusion as to what is objectively normal is a difficult thing to do. As societies, that's what we try to spend our time doing. In America, we have norms, and even smaller than that, in just particular states, there's norms that we expect people to adhere to, and in other places it's different. I just think having that perspective, having that kind of step back and look at it, I think that's an important perspective to have.
That leads perfectly into the next point I was going to make about this. Perfectly. Because the next point I was going to make is one thing that people get trapped in, and this doesn't apply just to weirdness, it applies to a lot of different things, is majority rule. The belief that if the majority thinks it, the majority is correct. And it's especially true if you think the same thing that the majority thinks. They'll use that psychological fallacy where they'll say, I think this, and guess what? Most people agree with me. Besides the point that Zach made, which is, it might not be that most people agree with you. It might just be that most people that you have talked to, that are in your bubble, that are in your social circle, agree with you, and you extrapolate that to mean of the billions of people in the world, that it's the same kind of thing. Not realizing the scale of difference there. Mm-hmm. But even if you're able to branch that out and go beyond your little bubble and use some kind of empirical data to determine that the majority of people agree with you, that leads to another question. Is the majority opinion always the correct one? Because in the case of what you said, 99 people in the room laugh, you don't. Does that mean that you're wrong for not laughing? Does that mean that you're the weird for not laughing? Does that mean that you should have laughed and there's something wrong with you for not laughing? Or could it be that you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are wrong in this case, and you're actually the only right one, but it just doesn't seem that way because you're the severe minority. So we have to keep that in mind as well when it comes to really anything, but since we're talking about weirdness today, when it comes to weirdness too, you probably are going to need more of some kind of as far as evidence in terms of what's weird than just, well, the majority doesn't do this, therefore the minority behavior is weird, or the majority thinks that it's weird, therefore it is weird. Because we can go beyond weirdness to things that are even more sensitive to, as examples of, just because the majority says so, it doesn't mean the majority is right. As an example, just to get people ruffled right away, look at the last presidential election. There are many people who are convinced, and a lot of them have valid reason for thinking this, that the person who was elected to office is in all kinds of terrible words that tries both him and his followers. But the majority of voters voted for that person to get in. Well, I mean, kind of. I guess if you go back to like the independents and all that, maybe you can say the majority of voters didn't vote for this person, but the person won the popular vote. So does that mean the majority is right? If you take that stance, then you have to put aside all your hatred for this result and say, well, the majority is right because the majority is always right. And if you have an exception, then the majority is not always right, and then we're back to what I said before. So just keep that in mind, those two things. Subjective versus objective, and majority as we go forward.
Yeah. The mob rule is another good point. I guess I'll just talk about this for a second, too, just because this one bothers me to no end. I hate the majority rule perspective. I hate the mob rule perspective that a lot of people have. And it's, weird is one thing, but obviously this branches out into basically everything. Whatever the majority says. And here's the problem. The majority can be deceived, okay? We have our opinions based on the information we get. And this is why, on a big national level, we're talking about something like elections. What we get for information matters so much. I can't even begin to overstate it. News media, for example, is responsible for a lot of the stuff that we get. You got apps like TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or whatever now, where you're getting this information about political candidates. And all of that information comes in, and you don't know how to decipher it. So we're all just getting flooded with information. We don't know what's true. We don't know what's false. And we're supposed to make a determination on that. Well, if you have all that information out there, much of which is unverified, and people are forming opinions on that, of course the result that you're going to get is not accurate. Not accurate in the objective sense of there is a true answer, there's a true answer, and there is an answer that is not true. Okay? And if that is the view that you have, if you believe that, it's an impossible game that we play to try to find out what the objective truth is for something like weirdness. But also, if we kind of, because we're looking at this very deep, if we kind of back up and just look at the surface level, you walk past somebody on the street, you see them doing something that you think is bizarre, something that's out of the ordinary. You're not going to take the time to psychoanalyze you're not going to get the pull together and find out from the whole world whether everyone agrees with you or not. You're going to make a quick snap decision and judgment based on what you see. If there's any takeaways from this episode that I kind of want to get across to people, it's that in those situations, you gotta bear in mind a couple things. I guess I could maybe format this a little bit better so it makes more sense. Is the thing that you're calling weird hurting somebody else? Is it hurting the person themselves? Is there a major negative consequence that's going to result from this weird behavior? If none of those things are the case, then jumping to the immediate conclusion that it's bad behavior or that it should be stopped is not necessarily the right thing to do. So, you'll hear me talk about this a lot. I know we haven't done a lot of video podcasts yet. Of course, we have a large library for you guys to listen to over on Spotify. You can go check that out. But I've been saying this for a long time, and it's just we need to think more about the actions we take, the things that we do. It's very important for our growth, but also our society that we live in. We want thinkers out there. We want people to consider their actions, to consider how their behavior shapes the world around them, because this is the world that we, whether we want to or not, all share together. One more thing I want to give as an example real quick about weirdness is, and I just thought of this when you were talking, Brian, not that you said something that alluded to it necessarily, but there is a practice for some mothers. I don't know which culture this is or where this happens predominantly, but they eat the placenta after a birth. Okay. I find that personally to be extraordinarily weird or odd, mostly because I don't come from a place and I don't know anyone who's done this practice. It has not been something that we have dogs, and so we've dogs have had puppies. They do that. The dogs will do that. So on a maybe an instinctual level, it can make sense. But I think that's an example of something that as soon as you hear that, right? If you're anything like me, your gut reaction is gross, nasty. That's weird. That's probably your gut reaction. But then if you go back to that question I asked, is the behavior causing the person harm? Is it causing someone else harm? Is there a negative consequence that you can immediately point to as a result of the behavior? I think the answer is no on all three of those in this case, even though it is really bizarre and makes you feel uncomfortable. So this is one of those situations where maybe it is important to step back and think about it before you immediately go to that person and chastise them or call them weird or call them whatever name under the sun that you want to. This is an important time to reevaluate the way that you perceive this action. But anyway, back to you, Brian.
This again leads...
I ramble on too much. I'm sorry.
Do not apologize, Zach. You're good. This leads again into the two main points that I've already established for this weirdness episode, which is the majority rule fallacy and the subjective versus objective. Because let's go back to the beginning of what you were saying, regarding mob rule and all that. In a previous episode, very recent episode actually, when we discussed debates. We didn't debate each other. We were talking about debates. I went into the whole thing about a lot of different bad faith practices that debaters use. And the majority rule one, I don't think I mentioned, but it's another example of how majority rule fallacy is just that. Someone will make a point, whatever the point is, they'll be passionate about it, they'll be yelling and screaming, they'll be, saying things with this moral indignation, and then they'll add, and by the way, most people agree with me. A, how do you know that? And B, even if they do, that doesn't mean that you are right. That just means that the majority could be wrong. So that's the other thing. But just like with anything else, the majority rule fallacy is only used when it's convenient. Because if the roles are reversed and you were convinced that you were right, and it turned out that the majority disagreed with you, you wouldn't just say, well, you know what, I guess I'm wrong then. You would say majority doesn't always mean that it's right. So you're right half the time. But the other point is, let's go back to the placenta example. It's a strange example, which is perfect for this episode.
One may even say a weird example.
One might say that. Drink up, people. I'm just kidding. Don't do that, like I said.
Don't do that.
Yes, like I said, yes. So, Zach and I live in two different cultures. Zach lives in a culture where it is normal to not eat the placenta. I live in the culture where it's normal for moms to eat the placenta. So Zach thinks that my culture or my behavior or the behavior of the women in my culture is weird. I think that the behavior in Zach's culture is weird. I think it's weird that the people don't eat the placenta. Who is wrong? And why? And the problem with this is, if people are being honest, what a lot of them would say, here's my cynicism, is I'm right because I'm me. I'm right because I'm the moral arbiter for what is right and wrong, for what is good and bad. So because I think that this is normal, that must be objectively normal. This goes back to my subjective or subjective thought. So now apply this to any example besides just eating the placenta. Whatever it is. I think something is weird. You, the audience member, think something is not weird. Or we have two different practices. I think yours is weird. You think mine is weird. Who's right? Or who's wrong? And you have to answer that in a way besides saying, I'm right because I'm me. And if you can't, this is where the whole thing of weirdness gets very murky.
Yeah, not only the questions. I'll add one more question to what you just said. why does it matter? That is the third question I would ask.
Also a good question.
You know, because we're looking at that and we're thinking, you know, what is the result of whatever decision I come to? If I find out that it is weird, does it make a difference? Does it change anything? Well, if you guys want to know the answer to that, you're going to have to hang on real tight because we're going to be back in just a moment. We're going to take a short break. We got something fun for you.
The thing about the video now for everyone is there's no uncertainty about who's given the segment because you can tell by the size difference. We'll say that. So I got to admit, this was the first time since I was doing things that piss you off or shouldn't that I couldn't decide which one I wanted to do, which is interesting because what I ultimately decided to do as my choice for today is people who are indecisive. So now I'm going to play this out in a scenario that is pretty common that all of us have seen either as a worker or as a fellow customer. You're at some kind of restaurant, like I guess fast food, because sit-down restaurant, this wouldn't be an issue. A fast food restaurant. You're waiting in line. There's people in front of you obviously ordering, and above you is the whole wall that gives you the entire menu. It has the prices. It has all the different options. It gets even extra info that you might not even need or that you might need, whatever. So you have all this time to look at it. You can stand there with your arms crossed, just look at everything. Do some math in your head or in the calculator, figure out what you want. Then you get to it's your turn. The person's asking for your order. How do you not know? You have all this time, and even if you didn't have time, you went right up to the window. How do you not know what you want? You're a grown-ass adult. You know what you like and what you don't like. How do you not know? And if there was no line and you walked right up and you didn't know, then step to the side until you can decide. But you just hold up the entire line, even if you're the only one there. Eventually, people are going to get behind you because you can't make up your fucking mind. Figure out what you want. It's not that complicated. It's not that serious. Figure out what you want. Or people will come up to do something a little more important than ordering food. And we'll give them different options to how you want to do it. And they start like spazzing out. It's not that serious. Just pick something. People are driving on the road and they're like hovering between two lanes because, am I going left? Am I going right? Or am I going left? Am I going straight? Pick something, and if you're wrong, adjust. But you are holding up other people behind you. You're screwing up everyone else's day because you can't and won't make a decision. So it's a two-part thing here. It's not just the fact that you are taking too long to make the decision. It's the fact that you just flat out won't. For a lot of things that are an easy choice, left or right, straight or right, left or straight. Do you want a burger? Do you want fries? Do you want both? Do you want a milkshake? Do you want something else entirely? It's not that hard. Pick something, move on. And if you cannot decide yet, step to the side until you can figure it out. But the whole world doesn't stop for you to decide, and everyone's going to sit there and say, "Well, I can't wait to figure out what this guy decides. My day is going to be determined by what this person chooses for his lunch. I cannot wait." You're not that important. You're not that special. Figure out what you're doing with your life. Move on.
Well, that was a great segment, Brian. I agree with you a lot on this one. It is really infuriating when I go to restaurants, and I'll go to the restaurants with the family, whatever. So we got 4 people and we all have to decide what we want or what we're doing. There's a couple pieces of advice I can give to people right off the bat that's going to save
random advice. Look at that.
No, this is targeted advice,
okay.
not random at all. For this advice, I'm saying, first of all, apps. Use apps. If there is an app for a restaurant, use that app, okay? Because you can place your whole order without having to speak to a single person. It's great. It's fantastic. I love it.
Or
as someone who doesn't like having conversations.
Right. Or the touch screens that they have now in the store where you can just order, and that way you can take as much time as you want to figure out. And I hope by the time you figure it out, 10 people are ahead of you now because you took too long.
Yeah, correct. And here's the other thing. If you don't have an app, if there's no app to use, then see if they have a paper menu, okay? There's some Chinese restaurants I like around my area. They always have these every Chinese restaurant for some reason has a paper menu. I love it. You just take one of the paper menus, you open it up, you look at it. You can sit wherever. You can sit in your car, stand outside, whatever. Figure out what you want to have, figure out whatever everyone else wants to have, and go in and order. I'm with you, and I talk about this a lot, guys, and if you guys don't know this already, I hate people who are inconsiderate. This all comes down to consideration, because you're not being considerate for the people behind you who are waiting in line, and you're also not being considerate to the worker who has to stand there with a smile on their face while you decide what you want. They're busy. They got other stuff they need to be doing. Whether it's taking more orders or going to help out in the back or whatever it is, they're at a restaurant. Restaurants are busy places, guys. Taking up their time while you sit there, I'll take the... My favorite, by the way, Brian, about this, last thing I'll say about it, is the people who come up. You've been standing in line for like 10 minutes. You get up there to the register. You guys got any deals? You got any deals? Got any promotions right now?
Or they'll give an indication that they never even looked at the menu that was above them. They'll get what do you guys have here? Yeah. It's like, you had all this time. You can't look at the menu in advance.
What's good here?
Oh God,
Sir, this is McDonald's.
Let's not get us started on the what's good here crap.
This is McDonald's. You should know by this point.
Yes.
How old are you?
Right.
Where did you come from that you don't know what's good at McDonald's?
Like, I don't get the mindset people have. Like, people just believe that, like, they literally believe that the world revolves around them. That, like, and that everyone else is more than okay with stopping their life because you're now, like, the next in line. So the people behind you have no problem. You know what? This guy's more important. Have at it. It's more important for me that he gets what he wants than anything else going on with me. The workers are like, forget about all the other customers. It's all about you. And people actually think that this is the reality that everyone else lives in. It's wild to me.
Yeah, I got a lot to say about people thinking the world revolves around them. We might have an entire episode just about that because there are some things I want to say about that.
There you go.
But that's for another time. All right. What I want to do now is I want us to try to answer a question. And the question is, let me read what I have here. Why are we adverse to those who are weird or have weird behavior? What is it about weirdness that makes us feel uncomfortable, even in the most benign examples? What do you think, Brian?
I think the simplest way I can answer this is people are usually afraid of what they don't know. And you see this all the time. This is one of the things that people use as a talking point, especially early on, for why racism was so prevalent and all that is because, or homophobia was so prevalent in the beginning, or even transphobia and all that, because you don't know anything about being a different race or being homosexual or being trans. So because you don't know it, you're automatically afraid of it, and therefore you automatically hate it, and so on and so forth. So when it comes to weirdness, weird behavior, whatever weird behavior that is, because you're so unfamiliar with it, because it's something that you would never even think about doing yourself, because it's something that you never even contemplated or anything like this, your immediate reaction is to be against it until you learn a little bit more about that person, about that behavior, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the simplest way I can explain it, is you don't know it. It's so unfamiliar. It's like a foreign language. So because it's a foreign language, it's like a kid eating something for the first time that they think looks gross. Hey, I don't want to eat this. And the kid's reaction automatically, because I don't want to eat this, I'm automatically going to assume that it's gross. Therefore, it is gross. Therefore, I'm not going to eat it. Like, that's the circular logic that they use. Same kind of thing here. I see behavior. I've never seen the behavior before. I'm unfamiliar with the behavior. Therefore, it must be bad behavior because that's how I can justify not knowing it. And then the cycle continues. So that's my answer for it.
No, I think that's a really good answer. I think you covered the bases on it. If I had to define it myself, it's just when something is unfamiliar. I think the only difference between my opinion and what you just said is I don't think necessarily that it all has to do with fear. I can see there's examples of things that I can think of right now that are unfamiliar to me that I don't feel fear as much as I feel maybe disgust towards. And that has to do with maybe a preconceived notion. If you take, for example, somebody eating an alive squid or an alive octopus. In Asian cultures, I remember seeing a video of people doing this. It's a thing that people do. I find it extremely weird and extremely uncomfortable. And I don't feel fear in the sense of the unknown in that case. It's more just I feel disgust by it. I guess that just goes into people's different reactions to what they don't know, to the unknown. And I think that why we were adverse to it, I think has a lot to do with our survival instinct in a way. And evolutionary perspective, I guess, on this would be we started off, and when things were weird, they were often dangerous. things that were unfamiliar were often dangerous territory. Yes, there could be things that you can do that you'll learn aren't as dangerous when you start doing them. If I'm foraging through a forest and I find a mushroom, if I just start eating every mushroom I see, probably going to end up dying in that forest. All right, that's there's a good chance there's some poisonous mushrooms out there. So being unfamiliar with it automatically poses a danger. So I think instinctually that's part of the reason we're adverse to it, why we automatically want to get away from it, because it feels threatening in a way.
Well, yeah, I think one of the keys, again, back to one of my two talking points, majority and subjective. This is the subjective part. I see something that I'm unfamiliar with. So like you said, it's not necessarily fear; it's like disgust. But even if it is fear, let's say it's fear or disgust or both. Mm-hmm. I feel fear. I feel disgust at what I just saw. Is that the same thing as this thing is disgusting? People word it that way. I get that. And just because you word it that way doesn't mean you're making you think it's objective. But just because you feel disgusted by it doesn't mean that the thing, that the look or the behavior or whatever it is or the words doesn't mean that it is disgusting. It just means that you feel disgusted by it. But this goes to, on a deeper level, the idea that people are a lot of where we are now with society, where feelings are the most important thing. So just you feeling something that way is enough for it to A, be objective truth, but also be more than enough evidence or more than enough of a reason to do something about that. Just my feeling alone. But make sure that we separate this. I feel disgust. This goes back to the placenta example. I feel disgust. Great, you feel disgust. That doesn't mean that whatever you're talking about is disgusting. It just means that you feel disgust, because the person can flip it back on you and just say, well, I think that you doing the opposite or you do something different is disgusting. So again, who's right and who's wrong beyond just I'm right because I'm me.
I'm thinking about this episode that we're doing right now, Brian, and I'm thinking about how it's going to come across. What are the takeaways here? I think it would be fair to say that a lot of people are going to leave this episode thinking that my opinion or your opinion is that we shouldn't rush to conclusions to label something as weird. That's probably the takeaway that someone's going to get from this. So the next question I want to get into, that I want us to try to answer, is why do we think that there is such a strong societal push towards accepting weird behavior? You mentioned the stuff about the homosexuals and transgenderism. Now we're to the point where it's just evolved to there's every gender under the moon or under the sun. There's every gender expression. There are people who like this and like that, or don't like this. There are people that are asexual. I mean, there's so much that's been taught to us, that's been given to us, that all of sounds strange to a person who's not in the know. But they're trying to force people to accept this as the new norm. And I believe that in a way they've kind of succeeded in that. Because now when you see a man dressed as a woman and he speaks like a man, he has a beard, whatever, but he has a dress on. Today, in today's day and age, you're very, very unlikely to have an outward verbal reaction to seeing that person. You're not going to see that person walk by you in the middle of the grocery store and immediately make a comment to them about what they're doing. What are you doing, dude? Why are you dressed? Why are you wearing your dress? That's something that you would have heard all the time before this was normalized in our culture, in our society. There is a reason, and I have a strong opinion about this, there's a reason why a lot of this abnormal behavior has been, why there's been an attempt to normalize this behavior. But what do you think about it, Brian?
Well, to start off, if that is, and I can see how that's the message that people can take from what we're saying, that's actually not the message I'm trying to get across. I'm not trying to get across the message.
Me neither.
I'm not trying to get I'm not trying to get the message across that like we should just embrace all weirdness and all that. And what I'm saying is just be mindful of the fact that it's your opinion of it is just that, your opinion of it and your subjectivity. So you think something is weird doesn't mean that it is. You think something is not weird doesn't mean that it's not, and that's not like enough evidence for anything other than just those are your feelings. That was my main point with all this, is kind of attacking people's my feelings come first mentality. But to answer your broader question, like a hard one for me to answer, because I don't know if completely people are pushing for accepting weirdness. I think they're pushing for people to accept certain things that would be considered weirdness, but it's being pushed not necessarily for this tolerant, accepting agenda. I think there's a more sinister agenda beyond that, not for everybody, not for each individual person, but for a lot of the mainstream pushing. It's not as simple as just, or it's not as virtuous as just, we need to accept people for their differences or anything like that. I think it's silly to think that that's actually what the reason is. There's other things going on, especially when you look at the fact that certain quote-unquote weirdnesses are not just accepted, but embraced, encouraged, and applauded, and other weirdnesses are absolutely not. So other weirdnesses are still absolutely not. Is it part of the goal where that's the next thing? Those are the next things that are going to be embraced? Or is it just line in the sand? This is accepted and this is not for now until we shuffle things around. And the things that used to not be accepted that are now being accepted, why? Is it being accepted just because people are suddenly enlightened? Or there's something else going on? Again, I'm not talking about an individual person. If you're a regular person down who decided, I thought this was weird, but now I'm accepting it. It's totally fine with me. It's not a big deal. I'm not talking about people like that. But you're talking about like the mainstream political, social environments. I think it's very naive to think that it's just something that is through some kind of virtue or some kind of self-enlightenment that people just decided this is okay now without a sinister agenda. What the sinister agenda is, there's a lot of different possibilities. I don't really know. I got a feeling Zach's going to get into one. But I just think it's very silly to think that A, we're now accepting all weirdnesses because we're not, and B, that we're doing it just out of the kindness of our heart.
I really don't know where to take this because I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll just start by saying I think that a lot of it comes down to control, and control when you're embracing the weirdness, when you're embracing all these new ideologies that are trying to be pushed on people, primarily from the left politically. We are a political podcast. No, we haven't gotten into politics this much in this episode, but we talk about politics a lot. And when it comes to shoving something down someone's throat, a certain viewpoint, a certain idea that you're supposed to get, that you're supposed to believe, or certain talking points you're supposed to tell everyone else. I think a lot of this comes down to control, and it's hard to pin down exactly why they want control in the way that they do. What it seems, if you look at the result, is that as more of these weird things have come out, as a segment of our society has latched onto it, there has become a larger rift and a larger divide between those who are conservative and liberal, those who are Republican and Democrat. There's a bigger divide now, and what it does is I think it makes it harder for people to cross from one to the other. Because if I believe certain things in the Democrat Party, I mean, think about it this way, right? If the Democrat Party and the Republican Party were the same in every single way, the only difference that they had was how they like to spend how they like to budget for the military defense. Okay, that's the only difference. If that's the only difference, it's very easy to move from side to side. Very easy. All you have to do is be convinced that we need a bigger budget, or all you have to do is be convinced that we need a smaller budget, and that's it. And you can move from one to the other. But the more that they ingrain themselves in differences, the more that rift is created, the harder it is for people to go from one to the other. So now you have, instead of having temporary Democrats, you have lifelong Democrats. You have people who are, you're either with us or you're against us. That's the mentality politically that's been created in our country. And with all these new things, and I think this is really where the Democrat Party is going to find that they're challenged the hardest, is that because they are continuing to push the envelope, because they're continuing to push what is accepted, all these weird things, trying to normalize those things, I think they're going to lose people. I think they're going to lose people. The people who support them are going to continue to get more and more ingrained into that belief, but they're going to lose people more and more as time goes on. I do wonder if we were on the same wavelength. And I'm going to say something here that's really controversial,
Awesome.
but I don't really
Awesome.
care. And that is, where does the slippery slope lead of beginning with accepting same-sex marriage until that's a normalized thing, to transgenderism, to all the different sexual ideologies, to people marrying their phones, people marrying bridges. You're starting to see a push for this thing that's like age blindness, where there is a push to either reduce the age of consent to a different level, or to change the laws and the punishment for acting in those ways. Obviously, right now, the Jeffrey Epstein stuff is top of mind for people, and there's still this like intrinsic disgust that we feel towards someone who would behave that way towards a child, or behave that way towards. But here lies the problem, is that we're going to start seeing, and I really believe this, we're going to start seeing a shift into the definition of what a child is. And I think that's where they're going to make some headway on, because right now in the country it's 18. It's been 18 as the age of consent as long as I can remember. I haven't looked up the history on it, but as long as I can remember, it's been 18. There is probably going to be a push to lower that. And in the same vein, what they're going to do is they're going to try to lower the voting age as well, because they're going to say that, hey, maybe instead of 18, we're going to do 16. At 16, you're old enough to vote. You're old enough to do all these things, whatever. They could change a lot of structural things like high school and the education system instead of the K through 12, K through 10, whatever things that they might do in order to facilitate this, because they believe that the attraction to children is just another one of the sexual attractions. That's the one, I think, that's the one step that I don't think they've been able to convince society is okay. And I think they're going to have the hardest time doing so. But I'll tell you this, when it happens, and I'm almost sure it's going to happen, you're going to see it from the left. You're going to see it come from Democrats. And once that latches on to one of their political fighting points, I think that's when their party gets destroyed entirely. Because I don't think there's enough people who are going to become okay with that, who are going to be on board with that, that it becomes a legal practice in this country.
That was a nail on the head assessment. I have several things I want to respond to. I guess I can start with, I've said before, not a ton on this podcast, but doesn't hurt to say it however many times I've said it. Since I mentioned the election earlier on, I think it's worth pointing out that Trump didn't win the election, the Democrats lost the election. And the reason I say that is because there were several things that the Democrats or the left went so far crazy on that they lost people. And there were plenty of people who initially, for the previous two Trump elections, did not vote for Trump, who voted for Trump simply because they're like, I can't take this shit over here now. You guys are going way too crazy. And the biggest things were the border, not so much trans in general, but the whole idea of like women playing in men's sports, which is kind of a small, which is a niche issue, but just the fact that how crazy they were with it. And there's a third one that I just forgot, but they went so crazy with some of that stuff that eventually they lost people. So that's kind of where you were getting at. But if you think about how this whole divide thing works as a possible agenda, as I said before, the right has a tendency to look at the left as weird because of things like their acceptance for homosexuality and trans, and the fact that they are can be sexually promiscuous. How liberal they are with all how, like there's no structure. It's all just do what you want, all that kind of stuff. And so they see that kind of thing, the way they dress, and they're like, you're a bunch of weirdos. So those people who believe those things are already entrenched onto the conservative party. So now you're on the other side, and you're thinking, how can I win over a bunch of supporters? I can embrace those people who have been rejected by the right. And how do I embrace them? I tell them that I accept them for those differences. I embrace those differences. I encourage those differences. I applaud those differences. And now suddenly, those people who got rejected are now being accepted. And now you have them in. So this is why I say how it's not completely just, I have this enlightenment where I see how wonderful you guys are. It could just be like a control thing. If I pretend that I accept these people for who they are, I'm going to have lifelong supporters and if I continue to say the things that they want me to say, they're going to continue to vote for me, so I get in power, so I can do what I want to do, which is my plan all along. Do I have proof that anything is going on? No. But to think otherwise, I have to think that politicians have your best interests in heart, which I do not. So that's the evidence I have to support that whole idea. But the problem with what Zach was saying, not what Zach was saying, I think it's happening. The problem with that whole idea is if you're on the side of accept everything, even though even currently people who say that don't actually mean that. There's plenty of evidence of that being the case, but they say that we accept everything, and it starts with things like homosexuality and trans and all that, which is to me a much easier thing to accept than where this is going to go. But you get to that, and then you say, okay, to be a part of this party, you must accept everything. And as a counter, you say on the other side are people who don't accept anything. They're bigoted, they're racist, they're sexist, they're homophobic, they're transphobic. So you don't want to be part of that party. But if you don't accept everything in this party, you're automatically part of that party. And you don't want to be part of that party, right? So you must accept everything. Okay, so I can accept homosexuality. That's easy to accept. I get that. Cool. I can accept trans. Okay. It might have taken a little bit longer, but I can get on board with that. Okay, great. So I'm still part of this party, and more importantly, I'm not part of the other party. Great. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, the next thing we have to accept is pedophilia. But remember, if you don't accept it, you're now automatically part of the other party. You're only part of that party, right? So you're going to accept it. Is that going to work to people? Some people it will work for, some people it won't. Now, again, do I have proof that this is going to happen? No. Do I think it's going to happen? I don't know. But I'm saying it could happen. And if you paint yourself into this corner where you accept everything, you kind of have to accept it. And that's the problem.
Yeah. I'll respond to that last point because I think it's an important nuance to think about. You're kind of on the fence, and I think a lot of people would probably fall into your camp with this. I'm certain. I get why you're on the fence though, because when you say something like the Democratic Party is going to try to make a push to accept pedophilia, when we think of pedophilia, in the legal system, it has a very broad definition because we're talking about anything from birth to 18 years old. What they're going to do, and I'm basically positive of this, is they're going to start blurring the lines. It's not enough to just say, I don't think that they're ever going to push and say, oh yeah, you can have a sexual relationship with a 3-year-old. They're not going to do that. What they're going to do is they're
16.
we're going to lower it down, right? We're going to lower it down a little bit. We're going to, and they also do this in a very clever way. And I only say clever in the sense that
like an evil genius way.
We don't pick up on it. It's very subtle. It's under the radar. And what they'll do is they'll say, hey, all right, let's take a state. I don't have exact data pulled up in front of me, but let's take any other random state. Let's take a state like Mississippi, for example. Maybe Mississippi has it on the books where if you are found, if you were over the age of 18 and you're found having a sexual relationship with someone between the ages of 15 and 18, then you're going to serve 3 years in jail. Let's say that's on the books, okay? What they'll do is they will lobby in whatever ways that they are, in whatever ways that they can, to get that prison sentence down from 3 years to 2 years. No one's going to notice. No one's going to really be asking questions. They're just going to see, okay, well, for this age range in particular, they're starting to lower the things. And eventually, they're going to change to, okay, well, if you're over the age of 18, you have sexual relationships with someone who's 16 or 17, then you're not going to have to register. And you only have 1 year of probation. No longer any jail time. They'll start moving and shifting it down to make the consequences lower and lower until the point where the public just becomes, okay, well, this is normal behavior. We're now okay with this. In the same way that it was very abnormal not that long ago to see a man wearing a dress and walking in the middle of your store, where your kids would never see that, where that would have been the most crazy thing that's ever happened in your life. Now it's a normal occurrence. Good luck going out there. I mean, if you live in a big city, good luck going to anywhere and not seeing someone who's a transgender person, and it's very obvious that they are. Good luck seeing it. I think that the envelope's going to get pushed, and I think that people are going to be a lot more accepting of it because they're going to do it so slowly.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. By the way, the third one that I forgot earlier about why they got too crazy was DEI. That was the third one. So yes, those are the three things that they went that starts off not that bad, but they went. So to be clear, those three things are not bad in and of themselves. They went too far with those three things, and that's where That's where they lost people. Okay, but so pedophilia might be a more difficult one. But let's take a slightly different tact for something else that has not been accepted, but kind of can be in this path that we're going. And that's incest. Because one of the arguments
don't get me fucking started, dude. There is some shit going on in the
country
I'm about
to. Because one of the arguments that gets used on the side of if you're seeing like a right versus left argument, like a debate where the right is saying no homosexuality is a sin, and no transphobia, no transgenderism, and all that. And the other side is on the side that they believe is the morally superior side, where they say, they're not. There's nothing wrong with those things. One of the arguments that they'll use is they'll say they're two consenting adults and they're not causing harm to anybody else. That's one of the arguments that they'll use. So with the consenting adults part, incest becomes very problematic. Because if they're both of adult age, they both have mental faculties and all that, they're both able to consent to things, to any kind of thing, you can't have a problem with incest if they're two consenting adults. Now, the harm thing is a little tricky because, well, if they have if a baby comes out of it, the baby can wind up being deformed and all that if you believe all the science. But let's say it's two men who are having an incestuous relationship, two brothers. Know who's going to be harmed by this outside of those two from that incestuous relationship? Nobody. So based on that criteria, you have to accept it, but you won't because you think it's weird or you think it's icky or anything like that, which is the point that the other side makes. The point the other side makes is if you have no standard for what's accepted and what's not other than just icky, then I can also say homosexuality is icky. I personally, me speaking as Brian, don't have a problem with it. But if other people did, you can't really combat that because you also have your thing of what's icky and what's not. It's just not the same spot. So that's where this whole thing becomes very problematic because once you add those two things into the equation, it becomes very hard to just say, I accept everything. Because if you do, you accept these two things as well.
Look, I don't want to talk too much more about that at the moment. I think that's... At the end of this episode, we started to get a little bit more into some areas in which I think are really good for a whole nother episode. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get off of here, guys, and we're going to be back every Friday at 8 o'clock in the morning with a brand new episode for you guys. You guys can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify. And hopefully you can also find us on X, all right?
Yeah, we've been having issues.
But if you want to... Yeah, we have some issues. So if you guys want to reach out to us, share your thoughts about this episode, share your thoughts about things you would like us to see in the future or like us to discuss in the future, please do so at valueadded.zb@gmail.com. If you're listening to this on YouTube or on Spotify, interact with the comment section or the poll on this episode. We really want to get the engagement going on these episodes because we want this conversation to be more than just me and Brian. We want to have a conversation with all of us because I think there's a lot of opinions to go around. There's a lot of thoughts and perspectives that we want to hear. As you listen to this show, you're going to find that I am a bit more of an asshole than Brian is, and that's fine. So changing my opinion is going to be a task, all right? But I encourage you to do so anyway.
I'm not gonna let that slide over. I'm not gonna let that slide over. It depends on what you mean by asshole, because I can be every bit of an asshole as you in general. I think just my positions are just not as firm, I guess. I don't really know how else to say it.
Yeah. Reference our episode we did on the political test.
Yes,
we had a political test episode. Go reference that.
I'm a little bit more, to use your word from earlier, on the fence about a lot of things than you are. Obviously, some people can interpret that as being an asshole because what they really mean is his firmness goes against my firmness on the other side. So therefore you're the asshole, not me. Because that's the only explanation and only conclusion you can come to. But as a side note, we do have in our library of future episodes possibilities who's the bigger asshole. Where we're going to come up with all these scenarios as the things that we have done and said and thought, and have you guys decide. That could be a fun episode. So.
Yeah, so we'll figure that out. But anyways, guys, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. We'll see you back here on Friday. Have a good one.